Benny Goodman and his music.
Starts at 10. That starts in 10 minutes or so. Welcome along, everybody. I am actually not here right now. This is previously recorded. As mentioned. I told you guys we were going to do this. Of course, I'm doing this a few days before I actually do it, so who knows what I might have told you between now and then, too. We'll find out.
Benny Goodman, ladies and gentlemen, the man with the torrid clarinet and the even more torrid band who purveys assorted rhythms, all danceable, in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago. And first of all, one of Irving's...
Welcome along, everybody. Still kind of doing some paperwork over here, doing a lot of things at once right now. Good time to trim my nails, too, while I'm thinking about it. No, just kidding. Hey, Chris. Hey, Kathleen. Hey, Laura. Hey, Mom. Hey, Dad. I don't have a chat up. I'm just guessing. But yeah, looks like that's going a little hot. The microphone. Okay. Welcome, everybody. So this picture is where I've been the last couple of days. We're a building adjacent to this, where the archives are. This is old St. Paul's Churchyard. In the background, you can see the Oculus, the train station / mall. All right. So, once again, I was going to have Mandy Crypt babysit for everybody. But she got another gig. So, I just threw this together. This is all the stuff that's been on my mind the last couple of weeks as I work on this. One kind of fun thing about this is you guys have been able to watch this thing progress all through the summer. All through the summer, every Sunday I was doing, here's what I've been researching this week, tours. This kind of brings it all together. I realized as I edit that Aaron Burr is really the main character in this book, even though he's not even buried at either of these churchyards. As we'll see, I suspect he's got more connection to it than people know. All right. We'll try this one out today. I think it should be fun. Hey, everybody. Good evening. You could all be heckling me in the comments, would you? Hey, Bob. Hey, Joanne. Hey, Octavio. Hey, Megan. Hey, Kristen. Hey, Jan. Welcome once again, Bonnie. See some of you on Sunday. Now this just reminds me, I gotta check. There's also a thing at Graceland on... Another thing at Graceland on Sunday. What time is that gonna be? Let me check. Allison Meyer, who has taken me around some other places, who has taken me around Greenwood in Brooklyn, is doing a thing at Graceland, I know. See if I can find any information about her gig. Check local zines and rags for the next gig.
Benny Goodman presents Helen Ward singing With All My Heart.
This is, I'm going to make sure that I'm not overlapping with her here. Oh, okay. Hers is at 1 o'clock, so that's perfect. So, afterwards, walk through history with Allison Meyer. That'll be right about when I am finishing. It is sold out, though, so don't listen to me. Never mind about that. Allison's really cool. I'm looking forward to seeing her while she's in town. Hey, everybody. Hope you're all behaving yourselves in the chat. It's really weird doing this without a chat window open. I'm just kind of hanging around here. I gotta find Miles, though. So while you guys are all here, I am gonna go find the Miles cat, who, for once, has not heard the sound, and immediately come running. And Miles is like, what the heck? This isn't Thursday. I'm not on the schedule today. Well, I got about 5 more minutes before the pre-show ends, it looks like. So I'll keep looking for him. I may regret that. He was just hopping up here earlier. While I was trying to put this together, he was all over the desk. Oh, Miles, are you back in here? Miles. Here's the guy. The Miles himself. It's just because I'm recording at a time. You guys will all get your Miles fix. You seem a little underwhelmed, Miles, so I'll put you down. Just doing Alice in the message here. Everybody, we're listening to Benny Goodman coming to you live from the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago, the Joseph Urban Room, which we found last Mystericon. Hello, especially to all the new people who came out on the tours the last couple of weeks since they started popping up on Block Club. Anybody who might have popped in from having seen me on Netflix. I mean, this is recorded the day before that show comes out. So for all I know, it's going to be a famous disaster by now. I don't know, I'm just being nervous. I'm sure the producers know what they're doing and all. Don't they always? I did, it's How to Become a Mob Boss on Netflix. I did some talking head shots for Capone. Maybe also by this time you all know they've cut me or something. Well, I suppose they probably wouldn't email me press materials if they had. All right, we're going to let Benny Goodman do one more tune, and then I will get started properly on this special pre-recorded tour. Oh. We all got this all memorized by now? I feel like I should, but I guess I'm always focused on other things at the time, too. I don't have all of the film footage I would have wanted for this tour specifically. Some of it's just going to be more still photos than anything else. I never thought I would need to film footage of walking up to, like, the McLaughlin grave. Or the John Coles. I think I might have that one, though. I don't know. There were a couple of them I was surprised I didn't have film footage of. So much I will know in 3 days' time by the time you actually see this. I'm filming this right before 3 days of research at the Trinity and St. Paul's archives. And also I may be hearing news about the Johann Hawk book this week. I may be hearing about the Netflix series this week. Who knows? It's going to be a momentous 3 days. Right at this moment I am at the Bob Dylan concert at the Beacon. It's about halfway through right now. He's probably doing Key West right about now. We'll see, the last 3 shows he hasn't mixed up the set list any. There hasn't been any surprise songs. But who knows what'll happen in Brooklyn the next 2 nights or at Beacon right now. I'm up in the balcony, hanging out, chilling with my friends after the pre-show. Letting Benny Goodman finish up this one number, then we will start up properly. Oh, papa. Burrs gone wild. Kind of a random decision yesterday to do this. I thought about just like re-airing Johann Hawk or something. Something that I do have recorded. But let's have fun. All right, everybody, welcome along to Mysterious Chicago. That's Benny Goodman coming to you live from the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours. Been a tour guide and a historian here in Chicago for going on 20 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out. I'm on the History Channel and the Travel Channel all the time. Netflix now, too, so I am incredibly famous. Mysterious Chicago, the book. H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, Murder Maps USA from Thames and Hudson, Graceland Cemetery, Chicago's Stories, Symbols, and Secrets, Just Kill Me, a novel about a ghost tour guide who makes places more haunted by killing people at them, and only partly autobiographical, not to mention The Smart Aleck's Guide to American History. So, what we're going to be doing today, though, is relates to the work that I've been doing in New York all week. Starting last year, I was working on a new book about graveyards in Manhattan. Initially, it was going to be about all of the graveyards around Manhattan, the African-American burial ground, St. Mark's in the Bowery, St. John's burying ground, Shearith Israel, the various Shearith Israels, but as it turned out, I didn't have room for everything, so Volume 1 is just going to be Trinity and St. Paul's. Let's go take a look at these. This is Trinity Church. Built in 1849, but there have been churches here since the late 1600s. There's an interesting thing in their charter that they were to pay the crown a rent of 1 peppercorn per year. In the 1970s, when Queen Elizabeth visited, they gave her 279 peppercorns, but now they're in arrears again. But the South Churchyard dates to about the time that the church was built in the late 1600s. And the North Churchyard was already in use by then. So my project has been figuring out who all of these people are, where their epitaphs came from, and what else I can say about them. There's also St. Paul's, just up the road. You can see One World Trade Center back behind it there. St. Paul's is another church with a churchyard that dates from the times of the Revolution. George Washington attended services of both of them. They even got a message when Washington and his troops came to town in early 1776. The bishop got a request saying, "Please omit prayers for the king." But Trinity was run by the Anglican Church. They remained loyal. At one point, the army even rode in with bayonets, just kind of to threaten them. But nothing really happened. The preacher just kept on going. And then the British took over the city a couple of months later. Then the whole church burned down. It was rebuilt at the end of the century, then rebuilt again in the mid-19th century. But today, you know who we're going to be talking about is a guy who is not at these cemeteries. Aaron Burr. Or if you remember that milk commercial, Aaron Burr. That's how most of us learned about Aaron Burr, right? That milk commercial. Honestly, I learned about Aaron Burr first from Apple II Jeopardy. I didn't know, I was a little kid playing Apple II Jeopardy, but I didn't know any of the answers, except one of them where the answer was Star Wars. But if I played it enough, I learned all of the answers. This was on like a 5-inch floppy disk. They could only hold so many games at once, so pretty soon I had memorized all of the answers. One of them was, he shot Alexander Hamilton in a duel of honor. The answer was Aaron Burr. That's all I knew about him until that milk commercial years and years later. But Aaron Burr was a lawyer in New York. Well, he grew up, he was the grandson of Jonathan Edwards, a preacher who wrote a book that was in, sermon that was in my high school literature book called Sinners at the Hands of an Angry God. It is fire and brimstone personified. Some lessons that Aaron Burr may not have entirely picked up on. This is Aaron Burr painted as a young man. This is really a very radical, revolutionary style portrait. He's being painted here without a wig on, without a lot of the trappings that you would normally see when people had their portrait painted in those days. He was a young man who went to law school initially at Princeton. Then, when the war broke out, he joined the army and ended up serving alongside a guy who is now at St. Paul's. Or under a guy who is now at St. Paul's. Initially, he was with Benedict Arnold on an expedition into Canada, before Benedict Arnold turned traitor. Weird to imagine that Burr and Benedict Arnold probably hung out. But right here at the front is a monument to Major General Richard Montgomery, who was one of the United States' first real heroes. And Montgomery had initially served in the British Army for a long time. Then when they got to a peaceful place, he married into the Livingston family, which made him very rich, also made him an enslaver, and wrote that he had never been so happy, but alas, it cannot last. But he was a dashing, handsome fellow. People found him kind of magnetic. He was a very fascinating personality to people, and decided to go on the expedition into Canada. He took over some cities in Canada as a part of an attempt to impress the French. The idea was that if we showed the French what our army could do, and what we could do against the British in Canada, then they might be induced to come help out and fight on our side in this revolution against the British. But in the Battle of Quebec, Richard Montgomery was killed. As the stories about his death circulated, one of the most famous that went around was that young Aaron Burr had tried to retrieve the body, ran back onto the battlefield, tried to pick up the body and run him back. Whether this is true or not, there are conflicting accounts. But really, it doesn't matter whether it was true or not. The point is, people thought that it was true, and this helped to build Aaron Burr's reputation tremendously. So, this monument, incidentally, very early in 1776, Congress, the Continental Congress, set aside funds to make this monument. So this was the first monument commissioned by the United States government. It wasn't the United States government yet, but it was the first Continental Congress monument. They put Benjamin Franklin in charge of having it made. He was over in France, got about 300 pounds to have it put together. It had to be shipped back very carefully and not right to New York at first. They had to route it through a place where it wouldn't get captured by the British. Initially, Montgomery was buried on the battlefield, but years later they were able to retrieve his body, or at least one that they said was his, and brought it back. He is now buried under the porch here. We'll get one quick look at the porch. I'll go through this again. Here we have Broadway. It's going to be back, back, back. Underneath this porch someplace is Montgomery. At least from what I can tell from the newspaper accounts. They don't really have good records of who is buried where at these places. A little bit more of Aaron Burr's war record. This is back behind Trinity Church. There's this kind of a garden area that is actually full of burial vaults. What this is a vault entrance. Theoretically, if you dug under this, it would take you down to a vault that is down under the ground, down underneath the church. This one, hard to tell how accessible it actually would be when they've got these things put in planters now. I don't think they can really still access these. But this one is the vault of William Alexander, who was also known as Lord Stirling. He had claimed a vacant title as the Earl of Stirling in Britain. It was one governing body agreed to it, another one didn't, but he took it anyway. And when he joined Washington's army, this made him the only nobleman, or at least as close as one came, to enter to fight against the British in the Revolution. Even though he desperately wanted to be a British lord, he also fought against them. He raised a lot of money to raise an army and was kind of a substitute for George Washington when George wasn't available as in commanding the army. However, he was also known for hard partying, and Burr wrote that he was pretty much always drunk. Every time he saw him from morning to night, Lord Stirling was drunk. Did not much outlive the Revolution, was initially buried in a Dutch church someplace else. When that one burned down, it is said that his body was moved here. He already did have a family vault here. His father is definitely here, but whether he actually was is one of those things that I hope to be able to clear up in the archives. Now, another one that I hope to clear up in the archives, we're moving a little bit ahead in Burr's life. While Burr was serving, he met Theodosia Provost. She was the wife of a British officer, but pretty openly sympathizing with the revolutionaries, and eventually pretty openly carrying on an affair with dashing young Aaron Burr. Now, Burr was a good 10 years or so younger than she was. It might have been more than that. She was definitely an older woman. But after her husband died of yellow fever close to the end of the war, she married Aaron Burr. Now, Burr at this time was known as a very progressive young man. Even despite his war activities, he was able to finish his law degree. He was reading books about what we would now call early feminist theory and talking about how women were absolutely the equal of men. He gave copies of this book to all sorts of people. His first act as a politician, he kind of shied away from actually showing up to work after he was first elected to local office. But one of his first acts was introducing a bill to end slavery in New York. It didn't pass, and he didn't free the people that he enslaved, but still, he tried. He was, at the time, you can kind of see this guy had the tools for greatness. Keyword there is the tools, not necessarily something he attained. But after the war, he practiced law around New York, and we're going to skip a little bit ahead in time here. It has to bounce back a little bit. But 1799, there was a woman by the name of Alma Sands, who spent one night in the very last days of the 1700s at her boyfriend's brother's house. She was dating a guy by the name of Levi Weeks. Levi one night was at the home of Ezra and Elizabeth Weeks, and a couple of days later they found that Alma could not be found anymore. First couple of days of the 1800s, her body was found in the old Manhattan Well, which is currently still extant. They were doing some renovations in a building on Spring Street and have ended up finding the old Manhattan Well down in the ground. You can now see it in the basement of a men's clothing store. It's entirely possible I will have taken you there on a morning mini tour or something, or one of our bonus tours while I'm out of town. Between now and then. If not, I'll show it to you another time. I definitely plan to see the Manhattan Well while I'm there. Having the body being found there led to a lot of ghost stories about it. They say you can see Alma Sands' ghosts moaning and wailing around the men's clothing store in Soho. Well, why not? So, Ezra hired 2 lawyers to defend Levi Weeks in court. One of them was Aaron Burr, and the other was Alexander Hamilton. This is one time when Burr and Hamilton teamed up as lawyers. And this is actually about the best documented trial of the era, the best documented murder trial anyway. It's very, very early days of the United States. And you can see from the language in the court that we hadn't really mentally divorced ourselves from the old Church of England at the time. There's a thing that the state charges that Levi Weeks, without the fear of God and at the instigation of the devil, murdered Alma Sands. It's very weird to read this stuff in court records now. It's not as weird as the stuff from a generation or two before, but still. Now, there was one great anecdote that came out of this. Well, a couple. One is that Hamilton and Burr apparently became convinced that one of the witnesses was the real killer. And a story was told for years that one of them held a candle up to the guy and said, "Behold the real murderer." Eventually, Burr said that he did this. Eliza Hamilton said Alexander was the one who did it. Records indicate that it never happened at all. Records indicate that they might have held the candle up to his face to identify him because it was dark, but nothing about them making some big accusation. But they got their job done. They managed to get Levi Weeks acquitted. Elizabeth Weeks, whose headstone is right here, was One of the key witnesses, she didn't show up in court, but she turned in an affidavit saying that Levy had been at her house the night Alma disappeared and just seemed totally normal, not agitated at all, just regular, eating a giant meal. So there is another anecdote that at the close of the trial, one of Alma's cousins looked up at Alexander, pointed her finger at him, and said, "If thee dies a natural death, I shall think there is no justice in heaven." Kind of foreshadowing, you know. Let us move a little. Let's bounce around a little in the 1700s. Alexander Hamilton, by this point, had started up the Bank of New York. Over here, back at Trinity, this whole section is mostly vault entrances, really. Over just south of the church. It's kind of a broken one right around here, and right there is the monument, is the family plot of a guy by the name of John B. Coles. Now, John B. Coles was known as a hero of the fever outbreak of 1798. Manhattan in these days had so much trouble with yellow fever. One of the reasons they eventually stopped doing burials in these churchyards is they thought that the smelly churchyards might be spreading yellow fever. It wouldn't be till the 20th century that people realized it was, in fact, mosquitoes that were spreading it. But John B. Coles raised a lot of money after the 1798 epidemic to get better water in New York. Getting better water into New York, better waterways, was probably a good idea whether it was going to be spreading yellow fever, help to stop yellow fever or not. So he formed a group called the Manhattan Company, whose job was to get money together and build these waterways to get new water in. But among the people on the job with him in the company was Aaron Burr. I can never resist saying it like the milk guy. So, in a bit of a sneaky move, we should point out a little bit about the politics of the era. The big defining thing at the time was whether you were a Federalist who supported ratifying the new Constitution, or an Anti-Federalist who thought that it was a mess and shouldn't be ratified. Coles, like Alexander Hamilton, was a Federalist. Burr was one of the more prominent Anti-Federalists. And in the process of putting the charter together for the Manhattan Company, Burr slipped a line into the charter saying that if there was any money left over, they could use that money to form a bank. And that's what they did. They formed the bank, the Manhattan Bank, which through various mergers is now Chase Manhattan Bank. And with that money, Burr was able to help out in the election in 1800 when both he and Thomas Jefferson were running for president under the Democratic-Republican ticket, the Anti-Federalists. And eventually it was a hotly contested election, but Jefferson won, and at the time that made Burr the vice president. John B. Coles remained on the board of the bank, but he was just kind of their token Federalist. Now, another person we've got to cover, Burr was not a very popular vice president. The other Democratic Republicans didn't really trust him by that point. The Federalists were afraid that he might eventually run for governor and support breaking New York off from the United States to form like a whole new New England country. A lot of this was pushed along by a newspaper editor named James Cheatham, who is here someplace. No one knows where he is. There's no record that he ever had a headstone, but he is buried somewhere in Trinity Church. He ran the New York Gazette, which was a strong Democratic-Republican paper, but really hated Aaron Burr. Now, in 1804, Aaron Burr knew he wasn't going to be the vice president at the end of this term. Raise your hand if you thought that guy with the flashlight was a ghost. But he started running for governor, and Cheatham started publishing all sorts of fire-eating editorials about him. Calumny. He was always talking about calumny, words for like lies and slander that you see a lot in things like this. Ripped on Burr every chance he got and started spreading really wild gossip, so much so that one of Burr's friends even walked through the street with a pistol trying to fight a duel with the guy. So among the things that he said were, by this time Theodosia had died. She died of cancer some years earlier. He said that Burr had hired sex workers to come and mock her on her deathbed. He also said that he had arranged to court black voters in the city by inviting them to his house and supplying them with sex workers and giving them sexual favors. This was known to be driving Burr nuts, but what really got him is that in some sort of discussion of this, it was said that Hamilton suggested that there was something else going on about Burr that was even worse. And we can only speculate what that might be, but we now know it's only been recently accepted, though unanimously accepted by the Burr associations, that while Burr was married to Theodosia and having children with Theodosia, he was also having children with one of his servants. One of them was born the same year as his daughter Theodosia. Another was born the same year that Theodosia died. Burr might have known something about, or Hamilton might have known something about this. In any case, this is what pushed Burr over the edge. He was already mad about losing elections. He was mad about all of these lies Cheatham was publishing, and he was mad that Hamilton was suggesting something even worse. This was when he challenged Alexander Hamilton to a duel of honor. So just a little ways away from John B. Coles, this is Alexander Hamilton and probably Philip Hamilton, his son, who died in a duel a few years before. There's a little sign over right below me here that mentions Philip but says they don't really know where he's buried. I found a couple of articles from the 1800s that say he was under the same monument as his father, but none of them were written by anybody who would really have been in a position to know. Of course, right in front of him there's Eliza, who outlived Alexander by 50 years. Alexander was George Washington's right-hand man, eventually became his Secretary of the Treasury and set up the financial system that propped up the United States for the first years of its existence. Now, of course, the subject of a very popular Broadway musical. Now, he was kind of obsessed with dueling. One other running theme throughout this book is how many of these people between the two cemeteries almost fought a duel with Alexander Hamilton. Because it's a lot of people. Now, those days, people were almost obsessed with dueling. Like, anytime somebody called someone else a damned rascal, they would exchange some letters and then want to stand 5 feet away and shoot at each other. These people were weird. Really, really weird people. In fact, I've just asked if they thought that this would fly. I asked the... where did I put this thing? Let me get this picture again. I just asked my editor if he thought I could get away with using this particular quote at the beginning of the book. "You are all weirdos. Sam the Eagle." It's the most logical way I can open a book about the people buried in these churchyards. Very interesting people, fascinating people, but I think just in general, people from the 1700s seem like weirdos to us now. But Hamilton ended up accepting a challenge from Burr. Here's his monument at dusk. Now, exactly why he did this when he had gotten out of so many other duels is kind of up to debate. There are those who say that he was suicidal. He told a couple of people he planned to just shoot in the air, throw away his shot. But he met with Burr out in Weehawken, New Jersey. We went out to the dueling grounds on one of the mini tours a year or so ago. I took a school group out there. And Burr did not throw away his shot. Burr, while the sitting vice president, he shot and killed Alexander Hamilton. From there, he had to kind of run away and wait to be cleared of all legal charges, but this certainly meant that he was not going to be the vice president much longer. Now, here's one thing that is lesser known, is that just across the churchyard from Hamilton is a guy by the name of Matthew L. Davis. There's a picture of him. Now, I think I got enough of a shot here. Yeah, you can see, we're standing on this porch. You can see Hamilton just on the other side. Matthew Davis was Burr's second at the duel, the guy who came with him for support. He was probably the best friend that Aaron Burr ever had and eventually became his closest confidant and then eventually his advisor. His New York Atlas obituary said that it was in the midst of the hurly-burly scenes of life, scenes that would discomfit most other men, that Mr. Davis employed the greater amount of happiness. This guy, everybody had a favorite story about Matthew L. Davis by the time of his death, talking about how he would work and work and work to get a friend nominated for an office, and then just for the fun of it, work and work and work to make sure he lost the election in the end. Almost, he just kind of liked to stir things up. He just liked to cause chaos. He was one of those guys. He was the one who apparently marched down the street with a pistol looking for James Cheatham in order to start a duel with him. But he also actively worked up to clean up Burr's legacy. Burr entrusted him with all of his letters. He wrote the first major biography of Burr. But in the beginning of it, he admits that he once had a bunch of letters that between Burr and various women from prominent families, indicating no great morality on the women's part. He didn't mention, not to mention on Burr's part. Burr was known to have had several affairs. In his will, he acknowledged a couple of children that he had fathered in his 70s. There are many others thought to be so as well. And at one point, it seemed like he would just, if anybody came up and accused him of being somebody's father, he would just agree to it. Even if he might have had a reason not to. He said, well, it's an honor if they want to say that I'm the father of their baby. This, of course, left him strapped for cash a little bit, too. But Burr had told Davis that under no account was he to destroy those letters, but the minute he got word that Burr had died, Davis destroyed those letters. So now historians just have to use our imaginations about what they might have said. So, of course, we go a little bit wild with that, but it probably doesn't have to be. Okay, so just over along the edge of the church, this one I really got into. This is a marker for a woman named Eleanora Martin Keene. Very young woman. Here she was in 1802. Now, Miss Martin was the daughter of Luther Martin, one of our founding fathers, prominent anti-federalist, major league drinker, buried over at St. John someplace now. So, when she was 15 years old, she fell in love with a guy by the name of Richard Keene, like Richard Reynold Keene, the Rayford or Reynold. Very dashing young man, ended up going off to fight for the French overseas years later. But he absolutely swept her off her feet. She was 15, he was about 22. This would be way less shocking than some of these things that I talk about at the time. But her father was absolutely furious. So Luther Martin and Richard wrote like 3 books worth of letters to each other, just calling each other every name in the book. At one point in one of the books, and these were actually published, they do have a letter from Eleanora herself describing when she went to sneak out. And from it, we get a sense that this was a young woman who was dying for some adventure, a little bit dramatic, definitely in love with Richard, and definitely looking for a way out of the life that she had at the time, living with an alcoholic father who was probably very difficult to deal with. Richard must have seemed like her ticket out of this. So the two married and she had a baby, but then died while she was in New York. So she's buried in a vault here at Trinity Church. Shortly thereafter, though, after Burr had killed Alexander Hamilton, he went down to the Southwest and got involved in some kind of a conspiracy. Historians are still debating exactly what he was planning and how far he got, but it was something along the lines of breaking off parts of the Louisiana Territory into a whole new country, of which he would be the king. Now, Richard ended up in his orbit somehow and became a part of the conspiracy. Burr might have looked about like this by then. So he was eventually arrested along with Burr for treason, and it was his father-in-law, the same one who had written letter after letter about what a horrible young man he was, who defended them in court and managed to get them acquitted in the end. So by that time, I guess it was all no hard feelings at the time. He said, well, I just thought you were too young. Now that it worked out anyway, and she's gone, c'est la vie. Bygones be bygones under the bridge. Forget all those things that I said about you. Now, just about the next vault up is, this is the John R. Livingston vault, but it happens to contain the remains of a guy by the name of Samuel Swartwout, who was another person who was involved in the plot, the Southwest conspiracy with Aaron Burr, and ended up on trial for it. But one of the witnesses was a guy by the name of General James Wilkinson, who was found to be manufacturing evidence. He probably didn't have to, but he tried to fake some of the evidence, which is probably how, when that was found out, is probably how Burr got acquitted, really. So Swartwout absolutely hated this Wilkinson guy and once shoved him in the street and then sent him a challenge to a duel. And Wilkinson sent it back unread, so he's published a letter in the newspaper saying, I have only to renounce and publish you to the world as a coward and poltroon. You should have been brave and died like a man. You should have considered that there is some small merit even in a villain's bravery. They never did have the duel. Now, ironically, if he had managed to stop Wilkinson, that might have been the best thing that Swartwout ever did. Wilkinson, it turns out, was a major league traitor. He was being paid by Spain to stop the United States' growth. He was being paid to try to have Lewis and Clark killed before they could explore the territory that Spain still hoped to get for itself. Not that they were going to do like a better and less problematic job with westward expansion in Spain, I imagine. But there was just recently a biography of Wilkinson titled An Artist in Treason. But you know who else hated Wilkinson was Andrew Jackson. He apparently heard about what Swartwout did and was so impressed that he never forgot how much he liked this Swartwout guy, and after becoming president made him collector of customs in New York, a job which allowed Mr. Swartwout to steal roughly $1 million. After his death, his obituary said, "By general consent, Swartwout's faults were seldom alluded to, and now that he is dead, they will be buried in the grave." But at this time, people were using Swartwouted as a slang word for embezzled or stole. And that would last for really quite a while. It lasted well into the late 18th century. You would still just occasionally see that word. Not so much anymore. Now we're back over here at St. Paul's. Now, I don't really have a good shot of this one at all, but back in the back there is a grave that can't really be read anymore, but we know that it was a guy by the name of Medcalf Eden who owned this big swath of land in what is now the Hell's Kitchen Times Square area up in Midtown. Very, very valuable land. He was a brewer by trade. There was an interesting thing in his will saying that dividing up the property between his sons, like what would happen if one of the sons died. Some of the property was sold to the Astor family for what turned out to be a very, very low amount of money. But after things got caught up in the courts and figured didn't know if the family should still have the land or if it should go to the creditors, the family hired Aaron Burr as a lawyer. By that time, he was much older. Well, actually, this would have started. The first time they hired him as the lawyer was still been pretty young, because the creditors hired Alexander Hamilton. So this is a time that they went back and forth against each other in court, and eventually the court at the time sided with Hamilton. But then Burr went off on his Southwest conspiracy. He went over to Europe for a while and got up to more tricks and schemes. And having completed those tricks and schemes, he came back and realized, I think there may be a new loophole. I bet I could still get the Eden family that land back. So he tracked them down and talked them into retaining him as a lawyer, saying, "I can get it back, you just have to do everything I say." Burr by this time was strapped for cash, but this was one of those legal settlements about a will that would go on for years and years and years. And eventually he did win the case, but I'm pretty sure he's probably the only one who actually made money off of this case. At one point he hired young Martin Van Buren as his clerk. This is part of how Martin Van Buren, future president, made a name for himself. And also, a few people noted that Van Buren looked a lot like Aaron Burr. It's gone down as a rumor that still comes up now and then. There's not a single shred of real evidence, but it is sometimes suggested that Martin Van Buren might have been one of the many sons of Aaron Burr. I doubt it, but on the other hand, you could probably say that about pretty much anybody in New York at the time. So, there's an even interesting thing. Medcalf Jr.'s will survives. And in his will, he even has a clause dealing with what will eventually happen with the property. He lists off the names of his 3 daughters and notes that any of them will forfeit their share if they marry without the consent of Aaron Burr. Very strange thing to see in a will, I think. Now, one other thing. Here we are at the edge of St. Paul's. Just off there you can see is where George Eaker, who killed Philip Hamilton in a duel. And just over around here, just over along the edge is this one with a little castle carved into it. You can't quite read it anymore. You just kind of have to know what it used to say. But what it used to say, it was for a guy named James McLaughlin, or Michael McLaughlin, from Scotland, who says that he was orphaned in the Jacobite uprising in 1745. This was a thing in the UK at the time when some Catholic sympathizers tried to get a Catholic king back on the throne with a little uprising. Most of the McLaughlins apparently sided with the Jacobites, the ones who wanted the Catholic back on the throne. Much of the family was killed. But Michael's pregnant mother escaped to Jamaica. Michael grew up, became a relatively successful guy. I believe he was a brewer. As a young man, he made a fortune that way, but then sided with the revolutionaries during the Revolution. Now, here's where it gets wilder. Is after his death, his wife married one of his employees at the brewery, and shortly thereafter, that employee was taking out ads in the newspapers accusing her of having had several husbands at the time, and warning any merchants in the city not to sell her any gin or snuff on credit because he wasn't going to pay for it. At one point, this woman, Jane, Michael's original wife, wrote to Aaron Burr saying, "Hey, don't you remember that you owe us some money?" Burr wrote back saying that he did not owe them money, and also added, "Remember that you once lost an estate by the unguarded use of your tongue." I haven't been able to figure out exactly what he's alluding to there. All I know is that is Aaron Burr literally telling someone to talk less, smile more. Just like in the musical. Here's an even weirder bit. Her daughter Juliana married Mr. Gardiner of Gardiner's Island. And their daughter Julia married President Tyler in 1844. She was 24, he was 54. She became a very vocal advocate of slavery and has one grandchild, not like great-grandchild or great-great-grandchild, but one of her grandchildren is still alive. Wild. It was a very late-in-life baby whose baby had another very late-in-life baby, obviously. One more thing to cover. This one is kind of only quasi-related, but still, over on the left here is a guy named Eliezer Oswald. Eliezer Oswald was a Revolutionary War soldier who quit over disputes over rank, which happened a lot. But then he started running a newspaper and ran afoul of a different newspaper editor named Matthew Carey. Matthew Carey said, "We should open a school for German immigrants." And Oswald was like, "No, we shouldn't. Immigrants are gross. And so are you. You have a deformed leg that makes you look like you have a cloven foot." So, Carey published a whole book about this guy called The Plagiariscuriliad. It was a book-length poem that was also a challenge to a duel. At one time, he rhymed dare say with Jersey. In calumny, let me move myself over here and I'll read this one off. In calumny may soon resemble 'em, and let these ever form your emblem, a snarling cur that ever growls, and when he's horsewhipped sadly howls, yet can't forbear to break the peace by yelpings which will never cease. A pillory near may do right well, libelers there do sometimes dwell. So also I learned a new swear word out of this one. The next word on the next one is throw in, so thieves and whores, scullion rascals, and many scores, vagabonds and scoundrels plenty, till make a literary dainty. Then the next line is like shitpokes, like things like that. That's a kind of bird, but you can see where he's going with this. Eventually they did in fact have the duel in which Oswald shot Carey in the leg and won. Carey survived, but it took a while to recover. But the most interesting connection to Burr here is there's a well-worn anecdote that late in life, Burr was reading the book Tristram Shandy by Laurence Sterne, and there's a scene where Uncle Toby is being bothered by a fly, but he opens the window and says, "Go, go, I shall not harm thee. Surely the world is big enough for thee and me." And Burr is said to have thought, if I had only read more Sterne and less Voltaire, I would have realized that the world was wide enough for Hamilton and me. There's actually a section in this poem where Carey says, now some people might talk about Laurence Sterne and Uncle Toby and telling the fly that the world is big enough for both of us. Screw that, I'm gonna have a duel. Anyway, the Plagiariscuriliad, this poem, it's one thing that we'll eventually be covering on the Patreon, linked down below, patreon.com/AdamChicago, because honestly, my biggest problem over the next 6 weeks is going to be trying to figure out how to trim this book down. I've got pretty much all the material I need now, pretty much, except for what I'll be getting in the archives the next few days. Now it's just a matter of either getting it down to word count and getting it organized. There's not going to be anywhere near enough space for all of the cool stuff that I have already found, like a copy of the Plagiariscuriliad. So we're going to cover this on a new podcast that is going to be coming out pretty soon, and that'll tie into the Patreon, so you'll be able to see it on there. So those are some tales of Burrs gone wild. Upcoming stuff, next Thursday, it's going to be Thanksgiving, so we will do a Thanksgiving leftover potluck, probably. Unless I come up with some other idea. Next in-person tour. Once again, I keep thinking this is going to be the last one of the year, but this time of year we play it by ear based on the weather and demand. But last weekend everything was very well attended. So next weekend, let's do Graceland Cemetery, the Underground Railroad. That'll be at 11 a.m. at Graceland. Afterwards, stick around. We might at least have a chance to meet Allison Meyer, who wrote a new book called Grave and is a cemetery tour guide in New York. Very cool person. So everybody, with that, I will put the Benny Goodman back on and leave this up to record some pre-show material. Thanks, everybody. I'm Adam from Mischievous Chicago Tours. Here is Benny Goodman.
Music by Benny Goodman is being presented from the Joseph Urban Room.
Thanks, Ann. Thanks, Kathleen.
Downtown Chicago.
Thanks, Joanne.
And now Benny Goodman's arrangement of The Bugle Call Rang.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Karen. I'm just guessing. But I will leave this up until I get to 3 on the clock. There's going to be about another 7 minutes. So you got about 7 minutes to talk. Meanwhile, also, see why everybody is hitting me up on Twitter. Oh, we're planning free show parties. Ugh. Package now available to pick up. I don't want to pick a package up. What did I even order? I bet they'll tell me what it is if I ask. Something from FedEx. Oh, jeez. From Chicago to Chicago. Oh, dear. Is this the coffee I ordered? We'll find out. Okay, everybody. Because at this point, I'm definitely not driving downtown. I have to wait till I get home. Many miles. I had a real rash of people coming up to me and they say, "Hey, we remember you from the pandemic and that crazy cat." I have to tell them, I'm still here. We're still at it. So thanks, everybody. You know, I'll keep this running a little while just in case I might be able to pop on and show up in the comments there. It's possible. Of course, they are doing a thing where you have to put your phone in a pouch at this. So yeah, that's probably not going to happen. Then again, I got a plan. Miles. You gonna jump up, Miles? I'll make some room for you. There you go. Good jump. Thanks up here instead. Took that down. Whoa, that's way too big. Miles. Curl up on the microphone and purr, purr, purr. That is correct. Hope you're all having fun in the comments. Miles. That's my kitty guy. Isn't that right? Isn't that right? Yeah. Yeah. Alright, with this done, I am done with everything I have to do before the trip. It seemed like stuff just kept on piling up, you know? Miles here. Well, it really wants to be on camera tonight. The famous Miles.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking. And here's Helen Ward to tell you all about it.
They're all trucking with Helen Ward. Sometimes the light comes shining on her. Other times she can barely... Sir. What a long, strange trip it's been indeed. I suspect Dylan's gonna play that tonight. Local shout-out. New York got the ways and means. I saw him play it a few times this tour already. Alright, we'll let Benny finish up this tune. Truckin'. Benny and Helen. Alright, Miles. What you gonna do? What you gonna do? Yeah. Yeah. This is the real star of the show, of course. Never started trucking. Miles. Miles. Ah. You gotta stay off of the keyboard, buddy. All I knew it all over town. Thanks to everybody who's kicking in here. Everybody's trucking. Aw. Cuddle, 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 cuddle. It's nice when it'll actually go to where the pets are and not make me, like, bend down to the ground. Like he usually does. See if you guys can hear this. Miles. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours, telling everybody to stay safe and stay strong. And, of course, if you can, stay spooky, everybody. See if we can do some Find a Grave tomorrow. I bet we can pull that off.